Place and places are important. Many of you are sitting in a particular pew this morning, or a particular space in that pew, or a particular pew that is a certain distance away from this pulpit this morning. That's important to you. Maybe it's where someone else used to sit with you. Maybe you learned something in that pew once upon a time, maybe even today. And maybe that pew helps you to remind you that Christ loves you and is with you. Overall, that pew, at least for some of you, means something more than just a simple wooden church pew. That place is important. And in life, where we stand, where we sit, where we put our roots, where we walk, run, live, are all important. And like place is important to us, this morning, the place where we find is also important. Jesus is walking through the Jewish temple in the portico, and that important place. Jesus is on the porch or portico on the east side of the temple, which is often called the Porch of Judgment. It is from this location that the kings of old, kings like King David and King Solomon, would go out and people would come there to receive their judgment. It is here where we find Jesus this morning, strolling through this historic location, physically embodying justice in this place of justice. This justice, which is not just something that Jesus preaches about, but also lives out in his life and teachings. For in his teachings, Jesus responds to this question of who he is. We hear this morning that Jewish people are gathering around saying, "How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly." And it's not just in Jesus' leisurely walk around the temple that he reveals his identity as one with God, but instead it's in Jesus' actions. Not just in this moment, but all those moments leading up and those moments that will come after. It's his work for justice for those on the margins. It's in his healing for the sick and the hungry. It's not just something Jesus is talking about, but it's something that he's living about. It's here in this portico that this all comes together. It's here where we see the kind of king Jesus will be. It's here that we see who God is revealed in Jesus. Through Jesus' ministry of those caught up in injustice, those suffering, oppressed, and excluded. And what better way for Jesus to demonstrate this and depict this ministry to the most fragile in the society, than through sheep. Today is Good Shepherd Sunday, and a few years ago, when preparing for this Sunday, rather than cracking open books or Googling husbandry or shepherding, I instead got the privilege to go to an actual sheep farm and learn what shepherding in today's world is all about. Where else can you better prepare for a Sunday sermon on Psalm 23 and John 10 than in fields surrounded by sheep? On that tour of the sheep farm, we began in the barn, where immediately opening the door, the sheep came to us, baying all around. We stood next to the lambing stall and the feeding mangers, and all around us, the sheep continued to back. What I learned that afternoon was that sheep are very fragile creatures. They need care. And while shepherding is one of the oldest professions, it is certainly not an easy one. Sheep have a nasty habit of getting into things that aren't good for them. They lamb in the cold winter months and needed to be tended and checked throughout the day and night. But through all this care and nourishment and feeding, the shepherds learned to know their shepherd. The sheep learned to know their shepherds. The sheep learned to depend on Charles and Leslie for almost everything. And so with a simple call of their name, the sheep would follow their shepherd. The sheep heard the shepherd's voice, and they followed toward green pastures, through dark valleys to still waters, all following their shepherd's hook. The sheep know their shepherds, and the shepherds know their sheep. It's this intimate relationship between sheep and shepherds and sheep that Jesus is talking about this morning. That Jesus is the good shepherd who always calls us by name, calls us exactly where we are, claiming us as God's own. This does not depend on how we feel, on our faults, on being doubt-free, on our accomplishments. It doesn't depend on any of that. Rather, it depends on only one thing: that we are known by the shepherd. For the sheep hear God's voice, and God first knows them. It is only in response, just like Zach this morning, that we turn around and see our shepherd. That we turn around and follow in response to our shepherd calling us. Even today, amidst all the other voices, the voice of the Good Shepherd is still a voice of faithfulness and promise. A voice that calls us by name and claims us as one of God's own. For we belong to God already. For we need nurturing and caring and loving because just like sheep, we have a nasty habit of getting into things that aren't good for us either. The Good Shepherd invites us into this fierce kind of love. The kind of love where the shepherd will go search out for the lost sheep. The love between a shepherd and a sheep. It's the kind of love that's powerful enough to hold us so that nothing, not even death, not even our own sinfulness and brokenness, not even when we wander, can take us away from Christ's embrace. The voice of the Good Shepherd is a voice that liberates rather than oppresses. It's the same voice that stands in the portico of judgment where they have been so often to learn and hear harsh punishments. And in today's gospel, instead, they find freedom and belonging and grace. We do not choose to be in the Good Shepherd's flock. Rather, the Good Shepherd calls us and brings us into the fold. Our belonging to the flock is a wonderful thing. But the tricky thing, the hard thing, is that we are a mere sheep in that flock. We do not get to decide who else is in that flock and who isn't. For belonging means that we don't always get to be that gatekeeper. We don't get to decide who's in and who's out. And in fact, it probably means that that flock's a lot bigger than we expect. It means that the Good Shepherd will bring sheep into the fold that we don't always like. Sheep that look different and believe different things. Sheep that we may even perceive to be dangerous. Sheep that don't fit into our world view. And we will be asked to love those who we'd rather not. To follow the shepherd means to follow him even into unknown territory. And to trust the shepherd even when we would like to wander. But belonging to the Good Shepherd flocks also means that we do not walk alone. That we are safe even in death, even in that shadow of the valley of death. To truly and freely and fully live without fear, without hiding, without hating. Because we have a place in Jesus' flock. And that place is more important than our church pews, than that portico of judgment, than those green pastures or still waters. Our most important place is where we all belong, and that is among Christ's loving and ever-growing Father. Thanks be to God. Amen.